Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. Chapter 3. Googleplex. As for the bracelet Mom wore to the funeral, what I did was converted Dad's last voice message into Morse code, and I used sky blue beads for silence, maroon beads for breaks between letters, violet beads for breaks between words, and long and short pieces of string between the beads for long and short beeps, which are actually called blips, I think, or something. Dad would have known. It took me 9 hours to make, and I had thought about giving it to Sonny, the homeless person who I sometimes see standing outside the Alliance Francaise, because he puts me in heavy boots. Or maybe to Lindy, the neat old woman who volunteers to give tours at the Museum of Natural History, so I could be something special to her. Or even just to someone in a wheelchair. But instead I gave it to Mom. She said it was the best gift she'd ever received. I asked her if it was better than the edible tsunami from when I was interested in edible meteorological events. She said, different. I asked her if she was in love with Ron. She said Ron is a great person, which was an answer to a question I did not ask, so I asked again. True or false, you are in love with Ron? She put her hand with the ring on it in her hair and said, Oskar, Ron is my friend. I was going to ask her if she was humping her friend, and if she had said yes, I would have run away, and if she had said no, I would have asked if they heavy petted each other, which I know about. I wanted to tell her she shouldn't be playing Scrabble yet, or looking in the mirror, or turning the stereo any louder than where you need to hear it. It wasn't fair to Dad, and it wasn't fair to me, but I buried it all inside me. I made her another Morse code jewelry with Dad's messages, a necklace, an anklet, some dangly earrings, a tiara. But the bracelet was definitely the most beautiful, probably because it was the last, which made it the most precious. Mom? Yes? Nothing. Even after a year, I still had an extremely difficult time doing certain things, like taking showers for some reason, and getting into elevators, obviously. There was a lot of stuff that made me panicky, like suspension bridges, germs, airplanes, fireworks, Arab people on the subway, even though I'm not racist. Arab people in restaurants, coffee shops, other public places, scaffolding, sewers, subway grates, bags without owners, shoes, people with mustaches, smoke, knots, tall buildings, turbans. A lot of the time I'd get that feeling like I was in the middle of a huge black ocean or in deep space, but not in the fascinating way. It's just that everything was incredibly far away from me. It was the worst at night. I started inventing things and then I couldn't stop, like beavers, which I know about. People think they cut down trees so that they can build dams, but in reality it's because their teeth never stop growing. And if they didn't constantly file them down by cutting through all those trees, their teeth would just start to grow into their own faces, which would kill them. That's how my brain was. One night, after what felt like a Googleplex inventions, I went to Dad's closet. We used to Greco-Roman wrestle on the floor in there and tell hilarious jokes, and once we hung a pendulum from the ceiling and put a circle of dominoes on the floor to prove that the earth rotated. But I hadn't gone back in since he died. Mom was with Ron in the living room listening to music too loud and playing board games. She wasn't missing Dad. I held the doorknob for a while before I turned it. Even though Dad's coffin was empty, his closet was full. And even after more than a year, it still smelled like shaving. I touched all of the white t-shirts. I touched his fancy watch that he never wore, and the extra laces for his sneakers that he would never run around the reservoir again in. I put my hands in the pockets of all of his jackets. I found a receipt for a cab, a wrapper from a miniature crackle, and the business card of a diamond supplier. I put my feet into his slippers. I looked at myself in his metal shoehorn. The average person falls asleep in 7 minutes, but I couldn't sleep. Not for hours. And it made my boots lighter to be around his things, and to touch stuff that he had touched, and to make the hangers hang a little straighter even though I knew it didn't matter. His tuxedo was over the chair he used to sit on when he tied his shoes, and I thought, weird. Why wasn't it hung up with his suits? Had he come from a fancy party the night he had died? But then, why would he have taken off his tuxedo without hanging it up? Maybe it needed to be cleaned. But I didn't remember a fancy party. I remembered him tucking me in and us listening to a person speaking Greek on the shortwave radio, and him telling me a story about New York's 6th borough. If I hadn't noticed anything else weird, I wouldn't have thought about the tuxedo again. But I started noticing a lot. There was a pretty blue vase on the highest shelf. What was a pretty blue vase doing way up there? I couldn't reach it, obviously, so I moved over the chair with the tuxedo still on it, and then I went to my room to get the collected Shakespeare set that Grandma bought for me when she found out that I was going to be Yorick. and I brought those over 4 tragedies at a time until I had a stack that was tall enough. I stood on all of that, and it worked for a second, but then I had the tips of my fingers on the vase, and the tragedy started to wobble, and the tuxedo was incredibly distracting, and the next thing was that everything was on the floor, including me, and including the vase, which had shattered. "I didn't do it!" I hollered, but they didn't even hear me because they were playing music too loud and cracking up too much. I zipped myself all the way into the sleeping bag of myself, not because I was hurt and not because I had broken something, but because they were cracking up. Even though I knew I shouldn't, I gave myself a bruise. I started to clean everything up, and that was when I noticed something else weird. In the middle of all that glass was a little envelope about the size of a wireless internet card. What the? I opened it up, and inside there was a key. What the? It was a weird-looking key, obviously to something extremely important, because it was fatter and shorter than a normal key. I couldn't explain it. A fat and short key in a little envelope in a blue vase on the highest shelf in his closet. The first thing I did was the logical thing, which was to be very secretive and try the key in all the locks in the apartment. Even without trying, I knew it wasn't for the front door because it didn't match up with the key that I wear on a string around my neck to let myself in when nobody's home. I tiptoed so I wouldn't be noticed, and tried the key in the door to the bathroom, and the different bedroom doors, and the drawers in Mom's dresser. I tried it in the desk in the kitchen where Dad used to pay the bills, and in the closet next to the linen closet, where I sometimes hid when we played hide-and-go-seek, and in Mom's jewelry box. But it wasn't for any of them. In bed that night, I invented a special drain that would be underneath every pillow in New York, and would connect to the reservoir. Whenever people cried themselves to sleep, the tears would all go to the same place, and in the morning the weathermen could report if the water level of the reservoir of tears had gone up or down, and you could know if New York was in heavy boots. And when something really terrible happened, like a nuclear bomb or at least a biological weapons attack, an extremely loud siren would go off, telling everyone to go to Central Park to put sandbags around the reservoir. Anyway, the next morning I told Mom that I couldn't go to school because I was way too sick. It was the first lie that I had to tell. She put her hand on my forehead and said, "You do feel a bit hot." I said, "I took my temperature and it's 100.7 degrees. That was the second lie. She turned around and asked me to zip up the back of her dress, which she could have done herself, but she knew that I loved to do it. She said, "I'll be in and out of meetings all day, but Grandma can come by if you need anything, and I'll call to check on you every hour." I told her, if I don't answer, I'm probably sleeping or going to the bathroom. She said, "Answer." Once she left for work, I put on my clothes and went downstairs. Stan was sweeping up the front of the building. I tried to get past him without him noticing, but he noticed. "You don't look sick," he said, brushing a bunch of leaves into the street. I told him, "I feel sick." He asked, "Where's Mr. Feeling Sick going?" I told him, "To the drugstore on 84th to get some cough drops." Line number 3. Where I actually went was to the locksmith store, which is Fraser & Sons on 79th. "Need some more copies?" Walt asked. I gave him a high five, and I showed him the key that I had found and asked him what he could tell me about it. "Well, it's for some kind of lockbox," he said, holding it up to his face and looking at it over his glasses. "A safe, I'm guessing. You can tell it's for a lockbox by its build." He showed me a rack that had a ton of keys on it. "See, it's not like any of these. It's much thicker, harder to break." I touched all the keys I could reach, and that made me feel okay for some reason. "But it's not for a fixed safe, I don't think. Nothing too big. Maybe something portable. Could be a safe deposit box, actually. An old one. Or some kind of fire-retardant cabinet." That made me crack up a little, even though I know there's nothing funny about being a mental retard. "It's an old key," he said. "Could be 20, 30 years old. How can you tell?" "Keys are what I know." "You're cool." "And not many lockboxes use keys anymore." "They don't?" "Well, hardly anyone uses keys anymore." "I use keys," I told him, and I showed him my apartment key. "I know you do," he said, "but people like you are a dying breed. It's all electronic these days. Keypads, thumbprint recognition. That's so awesome." "I like keys." I thought for a minute, and then I got heavy, heavy boots. "Well, if people like me are a dying breed, then what's going to happen to your business?" "We'll become specialized," he said. "Like a typewriter shop. We're useful now, but soon we'll be interesting." "Maybe you need a new business." "I like this business." I said, "I have a question that I was just wondering." He said, "Shoot." "Shoot." "Shoot. Go ahead, ask." "Are you Fraser, or are you son?" "I'm grandson, actually. My grandfather started the shop." "Cool." But I suppose I'm also son since my dad ran things when he was alive. I guess I'm Fraser too since my son works here during the summers. I said, well, I have another question. Shoot. Do you think I could find the company that made this key? Anyone could have made it. Well then, what I want to know is how can I find the lock that it opens? I'm afraid I can't help you with that, other than telling you to try it in every lock you come across. I could always make you a copy if you'd like. Oh, I have a Googleplex keys. Googleplex? A Google to the Google power. Google? That's a 1 with 100 zeros after it. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, You need the lock. I reached up real high and I put my hand on his shoulder and said, Yeah. As I was leaving, he asked, Shouldn't you be in school? I thought fast and I told him, it's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Line number 4. I thought that was in January. It used to be. Line number 5. When I got back to the apartment, Stan said, You've got mail. Dear Osk, hello lad, thanks for your glorious letter and the bulletproof drumsticks, which I hope I'll never have to use. I have to confess, I've never thought too much about giving lessons. I hope you like the enclosed t-shirt, which I took the liberty of signing for you. Your mate, Ringo. I didn't like the enclosed t-shirt. I loved it, although unfortunately it wasn't white, so I couldn't wear it. I laminated Ringo's letter and tacked it to my wall. Then I did some research on the internet about the locks of New York, and I found out a lot of useful information. For example, there are 319 post offices and 207,352 post office boxes. Each box has a lock, obviously. I also found out that there are about 70,571 hotel rooms, and most rooms have a main lock, a bathroom lock, a closet lock, and a lock to the minibar. I don't know what a minibar was, so I called the Plaza Hotel, which I knew was a famous one, and I asked. Then I knew what a minibar was. There are more than 300,000 cars in New York, which doesn't even count the 12,187 cabs and 4,425 buses. Also, I remembered from when I used to take the subway that the conductors use keys to open and close the doors, so there were those too. More than 9 million people live in New York. A baby is born in New York every 50 seconds, and everyone has to live somewhere. And most apartments have 2 locks on the front, and at least some of the bathrooms, and maybe to some other rooms, and obviously to dressers and jewelry boxes, and their offices, art studios, storage facilities, banks with safe deposit boxes, gates to yards, parking lots. I figure that if you included everything from bicycle locks to roof latches to places for cufflinks, there are probably about 18 locks for every person in New York City, which would mean about 162 million locks, which is a crevasse load of locks. Shell residents. Hi, Mom. Oh, a little bit, I guess, but still pretty sick. No. I guess. I think I'll order Indian, but still. Okay. I will, I know. Bye. I timed myself, and it took me 3 seconds to open a lock. Then I figured out that if a baby is born in New York every 50 seconds, and each person has 18 locks, a new lock is created in New York every 2.7 repeating seconds. So even if all I did was open locks, I'd still be falling behind by 0.3 repeating locks every second. And that's if I didn't have to travel from one lock to the next, and if I didn't eat and didn't sleep, which is an okay if, because I didn't actually sleep anyway. I needed a better plan. That night, I put on my white gloves, went to the garbage can in Dad's closet, and opened the bag that I'd thrown all the pieces of the vase into. I was looking for clues that might lead me in a direction. I had to be extremely careful so that I wouldn't contaminate the evidence or let Mom know what I was doing or cut and infect myself, and I found the envelope that the key was in. It was then that I noticed something that a good detective would have noticed at the very beginning. The word black was written on the back of the envelope. I was so mad at myself for not noticing it before that I gave myself a little bruise. Dad's handwriting was weird. It looked sloppy, like he was writing in a hurry or writing down the word while he was on the phone or just thinking about something else. So what would he have been thinking about? I Googled around and found out that Black wasn't the name of a company that made lockboxes. I got a little disappointed, because that would have been a logical explanation, which is always the best kind, although fortunately it isn't the only kind. Then I found out that there was a place called Black in every state in the country, and actually in almost every country in the world. In France, for example, there is a place called Noir. So that wasn't very helpful. I did a few other searches, even though I knew they would only hurt me, because I couldn't help it. I printed out some of the pictures I found. A shark attacking a girl, someone walking on a tightrope between the Twin Towers, the actress getting a blowjob from her normal boyfriend, a soldier getting his head cut off in Iraq, the place on the wall where a famous stolen painting used to hang, and I put them in stuff that happened to me, my scrapbook of everything that happened to me. The next morning, I told Mom that I couldn't go to school again. She asked me what was wrong. I told her, well, the same thing that's always wrong. You're sick? I'm sad. About Dad? About everything. She sat down on the bed next to me, even though I knew she was in a hurry. What's everything? I started counting on my fingers. The meat and dairy products in our refrigerator, fistfights, car accidents, Larry. Who's Larry? The homeless guy in front of the Museum of Natural History who always says, I promise it's for food after he asks for money. She turned around and I zipped up her dress while I kept counting. How you don't know who Larry is, even though you probably see him all the time. How Buckminster just sleeps and eats and goes to the bathroom and has no raison d'etre. The short, ugly guy with no neck who takes tickets at the IMAX theater. How the sun is going to explode one day. How every birthday I always get at least one thing I already have. Poor people who get fat because they eat junk food, because it's cheaper. That was when I ran out of fingers. But the list was just getting started, and I wanted it to be long because I knew she wouldn't be able to leave while I was still going. Domesticated animals, how I have a domesticated animal, nightmares, Microsoft Windows, old people who sit around all day because no one remembers to spend time with them, and they're embarrassed to ask people to spend time with them, secrets, dial phones, how Chinese waitresses smile even when there's nothing funny or happy, and how Chinese people own Mexican restaurants, but Mexican people never own Chinese restaurants, mirrors, tape decks, my unpopularity at school, grandma's coupons, storage facilities, people who don't know what the internet is, bad handwriting, beautiful songs, how there won't be humans in 50 years. Who said there wouldn't be humans in 50 years? I asked her, are you an optimist or a pessimist? She looked at her watch and said, I'm optimistic. Then I have some bad news for you, because humans are going to destroy each other as soon as it becomes easy enough to, which will be very soon. Why do beautiful songs make you sad? Because they aren't true. Never? Nothing is beautiful and true. She smiled, but in a way that wasn't just happy, and said, you sound just like Dad. What do you mean I sound just like Dad? Well, he used to say things like that. Like what? Oh, like nothing is so-and-so, or everything is so-and-so, or obviously. She laughed. He was always very definitive. What's definitive? It means certain. It comes from definite. What's wrong with being definite? Dad sometimes missed the forest for the trees. What forest? Oh, nothing. Mom. Yes. It doesn't make me feel good when you say that something I do reminds you of Dad. Oh, I'm sorry. Do I do that a lot? You do it all the time. I can see why that wouldn't feel good. And Grandma always says that things I do remind her of Grandpa. It makes me feel weird because they're gone. And it also makes me feel unspecial. That's the last thing that either Grandma or I would want. You know you're the most special thing to us, don't you? I guess so. The most. She petted my head for a while, and her fingers went behind my ear to that place it's almost never touched. I asked if I could zip up her dress again, and she said, sure, and turned around. She said, I think it would be good if you tried to go to school. I said, I am trying. Maybe if you just went for first period. I can't even get out of bed, line number 6. And Dr. Fiend says I should listen to my feelings. He said I should give myself a break sometimes. That wasn't a lie exactly, although it wasn't exactly the truth either. I just don't want it to become a habit, she said. It won't, I said. When she put her hand on the covers, she must have felt how puffy they were, because she asked if I had my clothes on in bed. I told her I do, and the reason is because I am cold. Number 7. I mean, in addition to being hot. As soon as she left, I got my things together and I went downstairs. You look better than yesterday, Stan said. I told him to mind his own business. He said, geez. I told him, it's just that I'm feeling worse than yesterday. I walked over to the art supply store on 93rd Street, and I asked the woman at the door if I could speak to the manager, which is something Dad used to do when he had an important question. What can I do for you? She asked. I need the manager, I said. She said, I know. What can I do for you? You're incredibly beautiful, I told her, because she was fat, and so I thought it would be especially a nice compliment. and also make her like me again, even though I was sexist. Thanks, she said. I told her, you could be a movie star. She shook her head like, what the? Anyways, I said, and I showed her the envelope and explained how I had found the key and how I was trying to find the lock it opened and how maybe black meant something. I wanted to know what she could tell me about black, since she was probably an expert of color. Well, she said, I don't know that I'm an expert of anything, but one thing I can say is it's sort of interesting that the person who wrote the word black wrote it in red pen. I asked why that was interesting because I just thought it was one of those red pens Dad used when he wrote the New York Times. Come here, she said, and she led me to a display of 10 pens. Look at this. She showed me a pad of paper that was next to the display. See, she said, most people write the name of the color of the pen that they're writing with. Why? I don't know why. It's just one of those psychological things, I guess. Psychological is mental? Basically. I thought about it, and I had the revelation that if I was testing out a blue pen, I'd probably write the word blue. It's not easy to do what your dad did, writing the name of one color with another color. It doesn't come naturally. Really. This is even harder, she said, and she wrote something on the next piece of paper and told me to read it out loud. She was right. It didn't feel natural at all, because part of me wanted to say the name of the color, and part of me wanted to say what was written. In the end, I didn't say anything. I asked her what she thought it meant. Well, she said, I don't know that it means anything, but look, when someone tests a pen, usually he either writes the name of the color he's writing with or he writes his name. So the fact that black is written in red makes me think that black is someone's name, or her name. And I'll tell you something else. Yes, the B is capitalized. You wouldn't usually capitalize the first letter of a color. Jose! Excuse me? Black was written by black. What? Black was written by black. I need to find black. She said, if there's anything else I can help you with, just let me know. I love you. Would you mind not shaking the tambourine in the store? She walked away, and I stayed there for a bit, trying to catch up with my brain. I flipped back through the pad of paper while I thought about what Stephen Hawking would do next. I ripped the last sheet from the pad and ran to find the manager again. She was helping somebody with paintbrushes, but I thought it wouldn't be rude to interrupt her. That's my dad, I told her, putting my finger on his name. Thomas Schell. What a coincidence, she said. I told her, the only thing is, he didn't buy art supplies. She said, well, maybe he bought art supplies and you didn't know it. Maybe he just needed a pen. I ran around the rest of the store from display to display looking to see if he tested any other art supplies. That way, I could prove if he had been buying art supplies or just testing out pens to buy a pen. I couldn't believe what I found. His name was everywhere. He'd tested out markers and oil sticks and colored pencils and chalk and pens and pastels and watercolors. He'd even scratched his name into a piece of moldable plastic. And I found a sculpting knife with yellow on its end, so I knew that was what he did it with. It was as if he was planning on making the biggest art project in history. But I didn't get it. That had to have been more than a year ago. I found the manager again. So you said if there was anything else you could help me with, that I should just let you know? She said. Let me finish with this customer, and then you'll have my full attention. I stood there while she finished with the customer. She turned to me. I said, you said if there was anything else you could help me with, that I should just let you know. Well, I need to see all of the store's receipts. Why? So I can know what day my dad was here and also what he bought. Why? So I can know. But why? Your dad didn't die, so I won't be able to explain it to you, she said. Your dad died? I told her yes. I told her I bruise easily. She went over to one of the registers, which was actually a computer, and typed something on the screen with her finger. How do you spell the name again? Schell. She pressed some more buttons, made a face, and said, nothing. Nothing? Either he didn't buy anything or he paid cash. Shiitake. Hold on. Excuse me? Oskar Schell. Hi, Mom. Because I'm in the bathroom. Because it was in my pocket? Uh-huh. A little, but can I call you back when I'm not going to the bathroom? Like in a half an hour? That's personal. I guess. Okay, Mom. Yeah, bye. Well then, I have another question. You're saying that to me or to the phone? You. How long have those pads been by the displays? I don't know. Well, he died more than a year ago. That would be a long time, right? They couldn't have been up there for that long. You're sure? Pretty sure. Are you more or less than 75% sure? More. 99%? Less. 90%? About that. I concentrated for a few seconds. That's a lot of percent. I ran home and I did some more research, and I found 472 people with the name Black in New York City. There were 216 different addresses because some of the Blacks lived together, obviously. I calculated that if I went to 2 every Saturday, which seemed possible, plus holidays, minus Hamlet rehearsals and other stuff, like mineral and coin conventions, it would take me about 3 years to go through all of them. But I couldn't survive 3 years without knowing. I wrote a letter. Cher Michel, Allo. I'm Oscar's mom. I've thought about it a ton, and I've decided that it isn't obvious why Oscar should go to French lessons, so he will no longer be going to go see you on Sundays like he used to. I want to thank you very much for everything you've taught Oscar, particularly the conditional tense, which is weird. Obviously, there's no need to call me when Oscar doesn't come to his lessons because I already know, because this was my decision. Also, I will keep sending you checks because you're a nice guy. Votre ami dévoué, Mademoiselle Schell. So that was my great plan. I would spend my Saturdays and Sundays finding all the people named Black and learning what they knew about the key in the vase in Dad's closet. In a year and a half, I would know everything. Or at least, I would know that I needed a new plan. Of course, I had wanted to talk to Mom that night. I decided to go hunting for the lock, but I couldn't. It wasn't that I thought I'd be in trouble for snooping around, or that I was afraid she'd be angry about the vase, or even that I was angry at her for spending so much time laughing with Ron when she should have been adding to the reservoir of tears. I can't explain why, but I was sure that she didn't know about the vase, the envelope, or the key. The lock was between me and Dad. So for those 8 months when I went looking around New York and she would ask where I was going and when I'd be back, I would just say, I'm going out, I'll be back later. What was so weird, and what I should have tried harder to understand, was that she never asked anything else, not even out where or later when, even though she would normally be so cautious about me, especially since Dad died. She had bought me that cell phone so we could always find each other and had told me to take cabs instead of the subway. She'd even taken me to the police station to get fingerprinted, which was great. So why was the sudden starting to forget about me? Every time I left our apartment to go searching for the lock, I became a little lighter because I was getting closer to Dad, but I also became a little heavier because I was getting further from Mom. In bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the key, and how every 2.7 repeating seconds another lock was born in New York. I pulled stuff that happened to me from the space between the bed and the wall, and I flipped through it for a while, wishing that I would finally fall asleep. After forever, I got out of bed and I went to the closet where I kept the phone. I hadn't taken it out since the worst day. It was just not possible. A lot of the time I think about those 4.5 minutes between when I came home and when Dad called. Stan touched my face, which he never did. I took the elevator for the last time. I opened the apartment door, put down my bag, took off my shoes like everything was wonderful because I didn't know that in reality everything was actually horrible because how could I? I petted Buckminster to show him I loved him. I went to the phone to check the messages and listened to them one after another. Message 1, 8:52 a.m. Message 2, 9:12 a.m. Message 3, 9:31 a.m. Message 4, 9:46 a.m. Message 5, 10:04 a.m. I thought about calling Mom. I thought about grabbing my walkie-talkie and paging Grandma. I went back to the first message and listened to them all again. I looked at my watch. It was 10:26:41. I thought about running away and never talking to anybody again. I thought about hiding under my bed, and I thought about rushing downstairs to see if I could somehow rescue him myself. And then the phone rang. I looked at my watch, and it was 10:26:47. I knew I could never let Mom hear the messages because protecting her is one of my most important raisons d'etre. So what I did was I took Dad's emergency money from on top of his dresser, and I went to the Radio Shack in Amsterdam. It was on a TV there that I saw that the first building had fallen. I bought the exact same phone and ran home and recorded our greeting from the first phone onto it. I wrapped up the old phone in the scarf that Grandma was never able to finish because of my privacy, and I put that in a grocery bag, and I put that in a box, and I put it in another box, and I put that under a bunch of stuff in my closet, like my jewelry workbench and albums of foreign currencies. That night, when I decided that finding the lock was my ultimate raison d'etre, the raison that was master over all other raisons, I really needed to hear him. I was extremely careful not to make any noise as I took the phone out of all its protections. Even though the volume was way down, so Dad's voice wouldn't wake Mom, he still filled the room, like how a light fills a room even when it's dim. Message 2, 9:12 a.m. It's me again. Are you there? Hello. Sorry if it's getting a bit smoky. I was hoping you would be home. I don't know if you've heard what's happened, but I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. Everything is fine. When you get this, give Grandma a call. Let her know that I'm okay. I'll call again in a few minutes. Hopefully the firemen will be up here by then. I'll call. I wrapped the phone back in the unfinished scarf and put that back in the bag and put that back in the box and that in the other box and all of that in the closet under lots of junk. I stared at the fake stars forever. I invented. I gave myself a bruise. I invented. I got out of bed, went over to the window and picked up the walkie-talkie. Grandma? Grandma? Grandma, do you read me? Grandma? Grandma? Oskar? I'm okay. Over. It's late. What's happened? Over. Did I wake you up? Over. No. Over. What were you doing? Over. I was talking to the renter. Over. He's still awake? Over. Mom told me not to ask questions about the renter, but a lot of the time I couldn't help it. Yeah, Grandma said, but he just left. He had to go run some errands. Over. But it's 4:12 a.m. Over. The renter had been living with Grandma since Dad died, and even though I was at her apartment basically every day, I still hadn't met him. He was constantly running errands or taking a nap or in the shower, even when I didn't hear any water. Mom told me, "It probably gets pretty lonely to be Grandma, don't you think?" I told her, "It probably gets pretty lonely to be anyone. But she doesn't have a mom, or friends like Daniel and Jake, or even a Buckminster." That's true. Maybe she needs an imaginary friend. But I'm real, I said. Yes, and she loves spending time with you, but you have to go to school too, and friends to hang out with, and Hamlet rehearsals, and hobby shops. Please don't call them hobby shops. I just mean you can't be around all the time. And maybe she wants a friend her own age. How do you know her imaginary friend is old? I guess I don't. She said, "There's nothing wrong with someone needing a friend." Are you actually talking about Ron now? No, I'm talking about Grandma. Except actually you're talking about Ron. No, Oskar, I'm not, and I don't appreciate that tone. I wasn't using a tone. You were using an accusatory tone. I don't even know what accusatory means, so how could I be using that as my tone? You were trying to make me feel badly for having a friend. No, I wasn't. She put her hand with the ring on it in her hair and said, "You know, I actually was talking about Grandma, Oskar, but it's true. I need friends too. What's wrong with that?" I shrugged my shoulders. Don't you think Dad would want me to have friends? I wasn't using a tone. Grandma lives in the building across the street. We're on the 5th floor and she's on the 3rd, but you can't really tell the difference. Sometimes she'll write notes for me on her window, which I can see through my tiny binoculars, and once Dad and I spent a whole afternoon trying to design a paper airplane that we could throw from our apartment into hers. Stan stood in the street collecting all of the failed attempts. I remember one of those notes she wrote right after Dad died was, "Don't go away." Grandma leaned her head out the window and put her mouth incredibly close into the walkie-talkie, which made her voice sound fuzzy. "Is everything okay?" Over. Grandma? Over. Yes. Over. Why are our matches so short? Over. What do you mean? Over. Well, they always seem to run out. Everybody's always rushing at them and sometimes even burning their fingers. Over. I'm not very smart, she said, insulting herself like she always does before she gives an opinion. But I think the matches are short so that they can fit in your pocket. Over. Yeah, I said, bouncing my chin on my hand and my elbow on the windowsill. Yeah, I think that too. So what if pockets were a lot bigger? Over. Well, what do I know? But I think the people might have a hard time reaching in the bottoms of them if they were much lower. Over. Right, I said, switching hands because that one was getting tired. So what about a portable pocket? Over. A portable pocket? Over. Yeah. It would sort of be like a sock, but with a Velcro outside so you could attach it to anything. It's not quite a bag because it actually becomes part of what you're wearing, but it's not quite a pocket either because it's on the outside of your clothes, and you can also remove it, which would have all sorts of advantages, like how you could move things from one outfit to another easily, and how you could just carry bigger things around since you can take the pocket off and reach your whole arm all the way in. Over. She put her hand against the part of her nightgown that covered her heart and said, That sounds like $100. Over. A portable pocket would prevent a lot of finger burns from short matches, I said, but also a lot of dry lips from short chapsticks. And why are candy bars so short anyways? I mean, have you ever finished a candy bar and not wanted more? Over. I can't eat chocolate, she said, but I understand what you're telling me. Over. You could have longer combs so your part could be all the way straight and bigger mensels. Mensels? Pencils for men. Yes, yes. And bigger mensels that are easier to hold in case your fingers are fat, like mine. And you could probably even train the birds that save you to take shiitakes in the portable pocket. I don't understand. On your birdseed shirt. Oskar? Over. I'm okay. Over. What's wrong, darling? Over. What do you mean, what's wrong? Over. What's wrong? Over. I miss Dad. Over. I miss him too. Over. I miss him a lot. Over. So do I. Over. All the time. Over. All the time. Over. I couldn't explain to her that I missed him more than she or anyone else missed him, because I couldn't tell her about what happened with the phone. That secret was a hole in the middle of me that every happy thing fell into. Did I ever tell you about how Grandpa would stop and pet every animal he saw, even if he was in a rush? Over. You've told me a Googleplex times. Over. Oh. And what about how his hands were so rough and red from all of his sculptures that sometimes I joked to him that it was really the sculptures that were sculpting his hands? Over. That too, but you can tell me again if you want. Over. She told me again. An ambulance drove down the street between us, and I imagined who it was carrying and what had happened to him. Did he break an ankle attempting a hard trick on a skateboard, or maybe he was dying from a third-degree burn on 90% of his body? Was there any chance that I knew him? Did anyone see the ambulance and wonder if it was me inside? What about a device that knew everyone you knew? So when an ambulance went down the street, a big sign on the roof could flash, "Don't worry, don't worry." If the sick person's device didn't detect the device of somebody he knew nearby, and if device did detect the device of somebody he knew, the ambulance could flash the name of the person in the ambulance, and either, "It's nothing major, it's nothing major," or if it was something major, "It's major, it's major." And maybe if you could rate the people you knew by how much you loved them, so the device of the person on the ambulance detected the device of the person he loved the most, or the person who loved him the most, and the person in the ambulance was really, really badly hurt and might even die, the ambulance could flash, "Goodbye, I love you. Goodbye, I love you." One thing that's nice to think about is someone who was the first person on lots of people's lists, so that when he was dying and his ambulance went down the street to the hospital, the whole time it would flash, "Goodbye, I love you. Goodbye, I love you." Grandma? Over. Yes, darling. Over. If Grandpa was so great, then why did he leave? Over. She took a little step back so that she disappeared into her apartment. He didn't want to leave. He had to leave. Over. But why did he have to leave? Over. I don't know. Over. Doesn't that make you angry? Over. That he left? Over. That you don't know why? Over. No. Over. Sad? Over. Sure. Over. Hold on, I said, and I ran back into my field kit and grabbed Grandpa's camera. I brought it to the window and took a picture of her window. The flash lit up the street between us. 10. Walt. 9. Lindy. 8. Alicia. Grandma said, "I hope you never love anything as much as I love you." Over. 7. Farley. 6. The Minch / toothpaste. Tied. 5. Stan. I could hear her kissing her fingers and then blowing. 4. Buckminster. 3. Mom. I blew her a kiss back. 2. Grandma. Over and out, one of us said. 1. Dad. We need much bigger pockets, I thought as I lay in bed counting off the 7 minutes that it takes a normal person to fall asleep. We need enormous pockets, pockets big enough for our families and our friends and even the people who aren't on our lists, people we've never met but still want to protect. We need pockets for boroughs and for cities, a pocket that could hold the universe. 8 minutes, 32 seconds. But I knew that there couldn't be pockets that enormous. In the end, everyone loses everyone. There was no invention to get around that, and so I felt that night like the turtle that everything else in the universe was on top of. 21 minutes, 11 seconds. As for the key, I put it on the string next to my apartment key and wore it like a pendant. As for me, I was awake for hours and hours. Buckminster curled up next to me, and I conjugated for a while so I wouldn't have to think about things. Je suis, tu es, il, elle est. Nous sommes, vous êtes. ils, elles sont. J'y suis, tu es, il, elle est, non. I woke up once in the middle of the night, and Buckminster's paws were on my eyelids. He must have been feeling my nightmares. Chapter 4. My Feelings. 12 September 2003. Dear Oskar, I am writing this to you from the airport. I have so much to say to you. I want to begin at the beginning, because that is what you deserve. I want to tell you everything without leaving out a single detail. But where is the beginning, and what is everything? I am an old woman now, but once I was a girl. It's true. I was a girl like you are a boy. One of my chores was to bring in the mail. One day there was a note addressed to our house. There was no name on it. It was mine as much as anyone's, I thought. I opened it. Many words had been removed from the text by a censor. 14 January 1921. To whom shall receive this letter? My name is... and I am in a Turkish labor camp. Block. I know that I am lucky to be alive at all. I have chosen to write to you without knowing who you are. My parents, my brothers and sisters, the main, have written every day since I have been here. I trade bread for postage, but have not yet received a response. Sometimes it comforts me to think that they do not mail the letters we write, or at least throughout, and without once nightmare. To write a few words to me, I would appreciate it more than you could ever know. Several of the received mails, so I know that. Please include a picture of yourself as well as your name. Include everything. With great hopes, sincerely, I took the letter straight to my room. I put it under my mattress. I never told my father or mother about it. For weeks I was awake all night wondering, why was this man sent to a Turkish labor camp? Why had the letter come 15 years after it had been written? Where had it been for 15 years? Why hadn't anyone written back to him? The others got mail, he said. Why had he sent a letter to our house? How did he know the name of my street? How did he know of Dresden? Where did he learn German? What became of him? I tried to learn as much about the man as I could from the letter. The words were very simple. Bread means only bread. Mail is mail. Great hopes are great hopes are great hopes. I was left with the handwriting. So I asked my father, your great-grandfather, whom I considered the best, most kind-hearted man I knew, to write a letter to me. I told him it didn't matter what he wrote about. Just write, I said. Write anything. Darling, you asked me to write you a letter, so I'm writing you a letter. I do not know why I'm writing this letter, or what this letter is supposed to be about, but I am writing it nonetheless because I love you very much and trust that you have some good purpose for having me write this letter. I hope that one day you will have the experience of doing something that you do not understand for somebody you love. Your father. That letter is the only thing of my father's that I have left, not even a picture. Next, I went to the penitentiary. My uncle was guard there. I was able to get the handwriting sample of a murderer. My uncle asked him to write an appeal for early release. It was a terrible trick that we played on this man. To the prison board. My name is Kurt Schluter. I am inmate 24922. I was put here in jail a few years ago. I don't know how long it's been. We don't have calendars. I keep lines on the wall with chalk, but when it rains, the rain comes through my window when I'm sleeping, and when I wake up, the lines are gone, so I don't know how long it's been. I murdered my brother. I beat his head in with a shovel. Then after, I used that shovel to bury him in the yard. The soil was red. Weeds came from the grass where the body was. Sometimes at night, I would get on my knees and pull them out so no one would know. I did a terrible thing. I believe in the afterlife. I know that you can't take anything back. I wish that my days could be washed away like those chalk lines of my days. I have tried to become a good person. I help the other inmates with their chores. I'm patient now. It might not matter to you, but my brother was having an affair with my wife. I didn't kill my wife. I want to go back to her because I forgive her. If you release me, I will be a good person, quiet, out of the way. Please consider my appeal. Kurt Schluter, inmate 24922. My uncle later told me that the inmate has been in prison for more than 40 years. He had gone in as a young man. When he wrote the letter to me, he was old and broken. His wife had remarried. She had children and grandchildren. Although he never said it, I could tell that my uncle had befriended the inmate. He He had also lost a wife and was also in a prison. He never said it, but I heard in his voice that he cared for the inmate. They guarded each other, and when I asked my uncle several years later what became of the inmate, my uncle told me that he was still there. He continued to write letters to the board. He continued to blame himself and forgive his wife, not knowing that there was no one on the other end. My uncle took each letter and promised the inmate that they would be delivered, but instead he kept them all. They filled all the drawers in his dresser. I remember thinking, that's enough to drive someone to kill himself. I was right. My uncle, your great-great-great-uncle, killed himself. Of course, it's possible that the inmate had nothing to do with it. With those 3 samples, I could make some comparisons. I could at least see that the forced laborer's handwriting was more like my father's than the murderer's, but I knew that I would need more letters, as many as I could get. So I went to my piano teacher. I always wanted to kiss him, but I was afraid he would laugh at me. I asked him to write a letter. Then I asked my mother's sister. She loved dance but hated dancing. I asked my schoolmate, Mary, to write me a letter. She was funny and full of life. She liked to run around her empty house without any clothes on, even when she was too old for that. Nothing embarrassed her. I admired that so much because everything embarrassed me, and that hurt me. She loved to jump on her bed. She jumped on her bed for so many years that one afternoon, while I watched her jump, the seams burst. Feathers filled the small room. Our laughter kept the feathers in the air. I thought about birds. Could they fly if there wasn't someone somewhere laughing? I went to my grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, and asked her to write a letter. She was my mother's mother. Your father's mother's mother's mother. I hardly knew her. I didn't have any interest in knowing her. I have no need for the past, I thought, like a child. I did not consider that the past might have a need for me. What kind of letter? My grandmother asked. I told her to write whatever she wanted to write. You want a letter from me? She asked. I told her yes. Oh, God bless you, she said. The letter she gave me was 67 pages long. It was the story of her life. She made my request into her own. Listen to me. I learned so much. She sang in her youth. She'd been to America as a girl. I never knew that. She'd fallen in love so many times that she began to suspect she was not falling in love at all, but doing something much more ordinary. I learned that she had never learned to swim, and for that reason she always loved rivers and lakes. She asked her father, my great-grandfather, your great-great-great-grandfather, to buy her a dove. Instead, he bought her a silk scarf. So she thought of the scarf as a dove. She even convinced herself that it contained flight, but did not fly because it did not want to show anyone what it really was. That was how much she loved her father. The letter was destroyed, but its final paragraph is inside of me. She wrote, I wish I could be a girl again, with the chance to live my life again. I've suffered so much more than I needed to, and the joys I have felt have not always been joyous. I could have lived differently. When I was your age, my grandfather bought me a ruby bracelet. It was too big for me, and it would slide up and down my arm. It was almost a necklace. He later told me that he had asked the jeweler to make it that way. Its size was supposed to be a symbol of his love. More rubies, more love. But I could not wear it comfortably. I could not wear it all. So here's the point of everything I have been trying to say. If I were to give you a bracelet to you now, I would measure your wrist twice. With love, your grandmother. I had a letter from everyone I knew. I laid them on my bedroom floor and organized them by what they shared. 100 letters. I was always moving them around, trying to make connections. I wanted to understand. 7 years later, a childhood friend reappeared at the moment I most needed him. I had been in America for only 2 months. An agency was supporting me, but soon I would have to support myself. I did not know how to support myself. I read newspapers and magazines all day long. I wanted to learn idioms. I wanted to be a real American. Chew the fat, blow off some steam, close but no cigar, rings a bell. I must have sounded ridiculous. I only wanted to be natural. I gave up on that. I had not seen him since I lost everything. I had not thought of him. He and my older sister, Anna, were friends. I came upon them kissing one afternoon in the field behind the shed behind our house. It made me so excited. I felt as if I were kissing someone. I had never kissed anyone. I was more excited than if it had been me. Our house was so small. Anna and I shared a bed. That night I told her what I had seen, and she made me promise never to speak a word about it. I promised her. She said, Why should I believe you? I wanted to tell her because what I saw would no longer be mine if I talked about it. I said, Because I'm your sister. Thank you. Can I watch you kiss? Can you watch us kiss? You could tell me where you're going to kiss, and I could hide and watch. She laughed enough to migrate an entire flock of birds. That was how she said yes. Sometimes it was in the field behind the shed behind our house. Sometimes it was behind the brick wall in the schoolyard. I was always behind something. I wondered if she told him. I wondered if she could feel me watching them, if that made it more exciting for her. Why did I ask to watch? Why did she agree? I had gone to him when I was trying to learn more about the forced laborer. I had gone to everyone. To Anna's sweet little sister. Here's the letter you asked for. I am almost 2 meters in height. My eyes are brown. I have been told that my hands are big. I want to be a sculptor, and I want to marry your sister. Those are my only dreams. I could write more, but that is all that matters. Your friend, Thomas. I walked into a bakery 7 years later, and there he was. He had dogs at his feet and a bird in a cage beside him. The 7 years were not 7 years. They were not 700 years. Their length could not be measured in years, just as an ocean could not explain the distance we had traveled, just as the dead could never be counted. I wanted to run away from him, and I wanted to go right up next to him. I went right up next to him. Are you Thomas? I asked. He shook his head no. You are, I said. I know you are. He shook his head no. From Dresden. He opened his right hand, which had no tattooed on it. I remember you. I used to watch you kiss my sister. He took out a little book and wrote, I don't speak. I'm sorry. That made me cry. He wiped away my tears, but he did not admit to being who he was. He never did. We spent the afternoon together. The whole time I wanted to touch him. I felt so deeply for this person that I had not seen in so long. 7 years before, he had been a giant, and now he seemed so small. I wanted to give him the money that the agency had given me. I did not need to tell him my story, but I needed to listen to his. I wanted to protect him, which I was sure I could do, even if I could not protect myself. I asked, Did you become a sculptor like you dreamed? He showed me his right hand, and there was silence. We had everything to say to each other, but no ways to say it. He wrote, Are you okay? I told him, My eyes are crummy. He wrote, But are you okay? I told him, That's a very complicated question. He wrote, That's a very simple answer. I asked, Are you okay? He wrote, Some mornings I wake up feeling grateful. We talked for hours, but we just kept repeating those same things over and over. Our cups emptied, the day emptied. I was more alone than if I had been alone. We were about to go in different directions. We did not know how to do anything else. It's getting late, I said. He showed me his left hand, which had yes tattooed on it. I said, I should probably go home. He flipped back through his book and pointed at, Are you okay? I nodded yes. I started to walk off. I was going to walk to the Hudson River and keep walking. I would carry the biggest stone I could bear and let my lungs fill with water. But then I heard him clapping his hands behind me. I turned around and he motioned for me to come to him. I wanted to run away from him and I wanted to go to him. I went to him. He asked if I would pose for him. He wrote his question in German, and it wasn't until then that I realized that he had been writing in English all afternoon and that I had been speaking English. Yes, I said in German, yes. We made arrangements for the next day. His apartment was like a zoo. There were animals everywhere, dogs and cats, a dozen bird cages, fish tanks, glass boxes with snakes and lizards and insects, mice in cages so that the cats wouldn't get them, like Noah's Ark. But he kept one corner clean and bright. He said he was saving the space. For what? For sculptures. I wanted to know from what or from whom, but I did not ask. He led me by the hand. We talked for half an hour about what he wanted to make. I told him I would do whatever he needed. We drank coffee. He wrote that he had not made a sculpture in America. Why not? I haven't been able to. Why not? We never talked about the past. He opened the flute, although I didn't know why. Birds sang in the other room. I took off my clothes. I went onto the couch. He stared at me. It was the first time I had ever been naked in front of a man. I wondered if he knew that. He came over and moved my body like I was a doll. He put my hands behind my head. He bent my right leg a little. I assumed his hands were so rough from all the sculptures he used to make. He lowered my chin. He turned my palms up. His attention filled the hole in the middle of me. I went back the next day and the next day. I stopped looking for a job. All that mattered was him looking at me. I was prepared to fall apart if it came to that. Each time it was the same. He would talk about what he wanted to make. I would tell him. I would do whatever he needed. We would drink coffee. We would never talk about the past. He would open the flue. The birds would sing in the other room. I would undress. He would position me. He would sculpt me. Sometimes I would think about those 100 letters laid across my bedroom floor. If I hadn't collected them, would our house have just burned less brightly? I looked at the sculpture after every session. He went to feed the animals. He let me alone with it, although I never asked him for privacy. He understood. After only a few sessions, it became clear that he was sculpting Anna. He was trying to remake the girl he knew 7 years before. He looked at me as he sculpted, but he saw her. The positioning took longer and longer. He touched more and more of me. He moved me around more. He spent 10 full minutes bending and unbending my knee. He closed and unclosed my hands. "I hope this doesn't embarrass you," he wrote in German in the little book. "No," I said in German, "no." He folded one of my arms. He straightened one of my arms. The next week he touched my hair for what might have been 5 or 50 minutes. He wrote, "I'm looking for an acceptable compromise." I wanted to know how he lived through that night. He touched my breasts, easing them apart. "I think this will be good," he wrote. I wanted to know what will be good. How will it be good? He touched me all over. I can tell you these things because I'm not ashamed of them, because I learned from them, and I trust you to understand me. You're the only one I trust, Oskar. The positioning was the sculpting. He was sculpting me. He was trying to make me so that he could fall in love with me. He spread my legs. His palms pressed gently on the insides of my thighs. My thighs pressed back. His palms pressed out. Birds were singing in the other room. We were looking for an acceptable compromise. The next week, he held the backs of my legs, and the next week, he was behind me. It was the first time I had ever made love. I wondered if he knew that. It felt like crying. I wondered, why does anyone ever make love? I looked at the unfinished sculpture of my sister, and the unfinished girl looked back at me. Why does anyone ever make love? We walked together to the bakery where we first met, together and separately. We sat at a table, on the same side facing the windows. I did not need to know if he could love me. I needed to know if he could need me. I flipped to the next blank page of his little book and wrote, "Please marry me." He looked at his hands. Yes and no. Why does anyone ever make love? He took his pen and wrote on the next and last page, "No children." That was our first rule. "I understand," I told him in English. We never used German again. The next day, your grandfather and I were married.